Good morning. Today is Tuesday, July the 11th, 2017. It's 10 a.m. It's my pleasure to call to order today's meeting of the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers. Ms. Lisa Mosby, will you please call the roll?
Dennis Bridges.
Here.
Mark Hawthorne.
Here.
Robert Davis.
Here.
Jeff Duffer.
Here.
Robert Helms.
Here.
Clark McKinney.
Here.
Charles Round.
Here.
Mr. President, all board members are here and counted for.
Great, thank you. First item on the agenda will be to adopt the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda is presented.
Second.
Got a motion by Mr. Rom, second by Mr. Duffer. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item will be the minutes, which have been handed out.
Motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Motion by Mr. Rom, second by Mr. Duffer. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item will be the informal conference regarding the summary suspension.
Good morning. My name is Allison Renfro, and I am here today on behalf of the Department of Commerce, who initiated this informal conference regarding the summary suspension. Thomas Henry North, Funeral Director License Number 4635, Embalmer License Number 4636, per complaints number 017036711, complaint 201703671, 20170366761. For Tennessee Code annotated section 4-5-320, a conference is intended to provide an informal, reasonable opportunity for the licensee to present the licensee's version of the situation to the person or entity authorized by law to summarily suspend the license involved. If the agency finds that the public health, safety, or welfare imperatively requires emergency action, summary suspension of a license may be ordered, pending proceedings for revocation or other action. The sole issue to be considered today will be whether the public health, safety, or welfare imperatively requires emergency action by the board. On June 9th, 2017, these complaints were filed against respondent with the Board of Funeral Director and Embalmers. The department sent an investigation request, and Department of Regulatory Board investigator Lori Wilson Weaver obtained an affidavit from the complainant and two other key witnesses of these three alleged acts. Lori Wilson Weaver is present today and available for questions. The complaint states that in the late summer of 2016, respondent, funeral director, and embalmer, and a former employee were preparing the remains of a deceased female. Respondent was bathing the deceased with a soapy sponge and was cleaning the genital area of the deceased in an inappropriate manner. While doing such, the complaint alleges respondent made an inappropriate graphic remark regarding his actions that were disrespectful to the deceased. A second incident was observed by the former employee who witnessed a male deceased who had his funeral service at the establishment in October of 2016 being inappropriately handled in the general area by the that incident. During bathing, respondent made inappropriate graphic remarks regarding the deceased that were respectful to the deceased. A third incident occurred when respondent made remarks about a female deceased breast whose funeral were conducted by the establishment in September of 2016. Pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated Section 39-17-312, a person commits offense who, without legal privilege, knowingly, physically mistreats a corpse in a manner of abilities of the ordinary person. Pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated 5-317A, the board may refuse to grant or may suspend, revoke, or refuse to renew any granted when the applicant or holder of the license has been guilty of willfully violating any section under this chapter or any rule or regulation of the state of local board of health governing the disposition of dead human bodies. The applicant or holder of the license has been guilty of immoral or unprofessional conduct or any willful violation of any state law or municipal or county ordinance or regulation handling, custody, care, or transportation of dead human bodies. Pursuant to the rules of the board governing standards of service and practice, Rule Section 0660-11. 05 states all persons engaged in the profession of funeral directing, embalming, or operation of a funeral establishment shall at all times act in a professional not limited to the following. Members of the public shall be treated in a respectful manner. I have copies of the complaints, the response, and the affidavits for the board today. The respondent did respond, denying all allegations.
Please.
Ms. Weaver, have you begun the investigation? Thanks yet.
Present time I've taken the affidavits.
So that's as far as you've gotten so far. Ms. Renfro, are you asking for a summary suspension, or are you recommending one, or are you just leaving it to the guidance of the board?
Yes. Emergency action is requested by the department because the respondent is still has the tools and opportunities to continue these alleged acts.
I'm not as familiar with these proceedings, but it's my understanding that the entire board, we would like to bring one issue regarding Mr. Duffer.
Introduce yourself.
Yes, sir. My name is Kerry Norris. I'm an attorney for Mr. North.
Okay.
I'd like to raise an issue. Mr. Hesse spoke of his close friendship or a friendship with Mr. Duffer. And I note that they are Facebook friends, so it would be our request that Mr. Duffer be excused from any considerations.
I do know Mr. Hesse, and I am friends with him on Facebook, but that's all.
And do you presently or have you ever employed Mr.
He has as an employee.
I would submit that that's also a conflict.
Or can you give us some guidance?
Given those circumstances, so that the what?
Mr. President, if you would, my name is Tony Glendale from the Chief Counsel for Regulatory Boards Division of the Department of Commerce and Insurance. Whether or not Mr. Duffer would have a conflict is something that he must decide for himself, and the determination of whether or not he can make an unbiased determination of this matter, and also keep in mind is whether or not any relationship that he may or may not have had with anybody regarding this matter would bring an airing of impropriety to the board, or a decision that the board would make. So it is your decision, though, sir.
I certainly would not want to interfere with any decision made. I mean, I think I certainly, but I'm going to recuse myself just to make sure that the board stays above reproach.
For the record, Mr. Duffer has recused himself.
Thank you.
What are the next steps of your investigation? I mean, beyond the affidavits, you planning on investigating this further?
That would be at the direction of the attorney.
Please speak into the microphones so we can. There we go.
Further investigative steps would be the attorney for the board and whatever additional steps they want me to take following this proceeding.
I understand that the state is seeking a summary suspension, and the respondent is seeking a tabling of this. Is that correct?
That's correct. Unlike a formal hearing before the board, this was not postponed because the nature of the action is emergency actions. Today's determination is whether or not to grant the summary suspension until the formal hearing can be held, and if you decide no, that's the end of it, and we will process this complaint like we would any other complaint. The merits of the response and the rebuttal that we received this morning, see what additional issues we would want to investigate before the formal recommendation beyond the requested action today.
Excuse me. Do you know how long that it will be if we issue this suspension? How long will it take for the formal hearing to come about? I could answer that question. The statute requires that we provide a formal hearing within a reasonable amount of time after a decision of the board, if there is a summary suspension that would be placed. We would make it a priority hearing to have, and we would also work with the respondent and opposing counsel to determine what dates that they would be available for that. So it's difficult to determine exactly how long that would be, but that would be the number one priority of, it would jump to the top of our priorities for formal hearing within our division. It would also have to be amenable to y'all's schedule. Thank you. The information we've been provided this morning is quite disturbing to me, and I certainly do feel like additional information or additional search needs to be made, even though there hasn't been a lot of conversation from the board. I personally feels like that a recommendation, and I will make that recommendation, that a summary suspension be issued. I'll second that.
Motion by Mr. Vaughn, and second Mr. McKinney. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
So since you're not going to hear from Mr. North, when will you hear from him?
to the attorneys.
The statute says that he is able to present the situation during this hearing.
You'll be in contact with Mr. North, is that correct?
I think she suggested that she were to hear from him today.
That's my understanding of the statute, is that the informal, reasonable opportunity for the licensee to present his version of the situation.
And the U.S. Constitution guarantees him due process, and a due process includes an opportunity. And that's the reason you have hearings like this.
This isn't a formal hearing. It's a summary suspension request from the state. I don't either. If it's appropriate.
If I may, Mr. President, I believe I believe it would probably be better for this informal conference to take its natural course if the board would reconsider its decision that it's just made, just to allow the respondent to have a full opportunity to make their statements to the board that you all can hear. You all probably have some written documentation in front of you, but that way, if you could do that, so that he and his opposing counsel could at least address the facts, or what they see as the facts, to you all, and then after that you consider in light of everything, and then make an appropriate motion for that.
Mr. North. Mr. President, do we need to withdraw our motions until they get through speaking? I'll withdraw. No good. Motion has been withdrawn.
Mr. North, we're here this morning on complaints alleged or brought by Mr. Canute and Mr. Hesse and Ms. Gwynn. Can you explain to the board the nature of your relationship with those people and why they would be motivated to untruthful statements against you?
Pull those mics up closer to you.
It doesn't move.
If you just talk.
I think I stated in my response that Mr. Hesse and I have known each other since 2004. Mortuary school at Gupton. He started, I think, in the summer semester. Mr. Canute was a student of mine when I was teaching at Gupton back in 2007, 2008. I think I explained in there that Mr. Canute left Gupton, never finished, as Mr. Hesse did not either. Mr. Canute was there for a couple of semesters. Disappeared for a while, didn't hear from him until sometime in the latter part of summer last year, maybe it was in the middle of summer, sometime in the middle of the year, and said that he was leaving Detroit and coming back to Nashville and had a job here, and so he came. 2-3 weeks later into that job, he called me up and said that he had been terminated from that job, had no place to live, and I told him to come on to Funeral Home. We have an apartment. You can stay down here and you can figure out what to do. It was mowing season. We needed a little help in the mowing, maintenance around the funeral home, running errands and so forth, so we found stuff for him to do and paid him, gave him a place to live. In regard to Miss Gwynn, she was employed by our flower shop, not as a designer, but as a, I won't say bookkeeper, but just kind of as a receptionist, took orders, answered the phone, that type of thing. She and Mr. Canute struck up a relationship, and I was awakened one night by the Winchester police that they had caught Mr. Canute drunk and out wandering around naked with Miss Gwynn, and they were having sex in the back of a company vehicle. And I didn't take any action at that time, the reason being Matthew was drunk, and that was not a fair time to address the situation. But I did talk to him the next day, and I think I mentioned in my response, we talked for a better part of the day, and I decided not to let him go. should have, but at that time, I'm looking back, but I did not, because I wanted to give him another chance. The driving force behind these complaints is this. Mr. Hesse came to the funeral home sometime in the middle part of summer. He had called my wife numerous times and wanted to speak with me. He said I wouldn't take his phone calls, wouldn't answer his texts. To some degree, that may be true because I don't have all the spare time that he has, and when he would call, I was in a funeral or making arrangements or had things going on, just did not have time to talk. So he finally called Doris and told her, said, either you get him on the phone or I'm coming down there. So I took a call and talked to him. And he had no evidence or any idea, but he says, I think you're in trouble. And I said, what kind of trouble do you think I'm in? He said, I think you're having financial trouble. I said, well, you know how it is in the summer. It's always a little tight. But anyway, he came down, stayed, I don't even know if he stayed the night, but anyway, he came down to the funeral home, came to Winchester. The first of several trips that he made down there. He came back about a week later, brought his motorhome down, and stayed at the funeral home, wanted to help me. And I was the only funeral director in Balmer, and so, you know, I welcomed his help. And then he expressed an interest in wanting to buy the funeral home. And I told him I was open to that. If he wanted to think about it, make me an offer, you know, we can sit and talk about it. And we did talk extensively about it, not just on one occasion, but throughout the summer, we talked about it. And even up into the early part of this year. And the driving force behind this is it mystifies me because I'm not really sure what happened. Miss Diane Gray, who was here, she and my brother-in-law expressed an interest in buying the funeral home and wanted to know if they could come over and talk to me. And of course I welcomed that opportunity. They came and talked. And in the discussion, in some of the financial records that I showed Miss Gray, she discovered an embezzlement. I don't know how much detail I can go into because the investigation is underway with the Winchester Police Department. But my relationship with Mr. Hesse and even Miss Gwynn and Ms. Woodley was wonderful. Ms. Woodley went on vacation, I think May the 4th, May the 5th. It's going to be gone for a month. And I had mentioned to her that my brother-in-law and Ms. Gray were interested in buying the funeral home, and she said if they want to buy the place, you need to take the check and run. And that was pretty much what she said several times. I went into some detail in the statement.
Can you tell them, not the exact details of the investigation, but who's the subject of the investigation?
Mr. Hesse is under investigation for forging my signature on checks. Ms. Woodley is also investigating for embezzling and forgery. Ms. Gwynn is also under investigation for forgery and possibly embezzlement. Our accountant is doing a forensic account, right next to forensic accounting now, and we'll have that probably in the next 2 weeks. And at that time, that information will be turned over to the Winchester Police Department for further action. Everything was fine with the relationship I had with Mr. Hesse, Ms. Woodley, and Ms. Gwynn until the subject of my selling the funeral home, possibly to Mr. Colvin, my brother-in-law, and Ms. Gray, and immediately went south.
Okay. The reason for the summary suspension or proposed suspension relates to the treatment of 3 decedents. The first being Mr. Petty, and Mr. Canute in his statement talks about baiting Mr. Petty. You know that to be false. Why?
That is a false statement. Mr. Petty was a direct cremation. I picked him up myself at his place of death, brought him to the funeral home, took him to the crematory and received him there, placed him in a minimum alternative container, and then into our refrigeration unit. Once I had the paperwork, I cremated Mr. Petty myself, and then we had memorial service. At no time was Mr. Petty viewable, visible, or in the funeral home, anywhere where Mr. Canute would have had access to see what he claims that he said or saw. That's a completely false statement.
Did you even bathe Mr. Petty?
Mr. Petty was never bathed. He was a direct cremation, came in from the hospital, nursing home, right into the crematory.
And you've provided a statement as part of your statement, an invoice with a record of his being a direct cremation. Is that right?
That is correct. I have a copy of the contract where he was a direct cremation. We provided a minimal alternative container, followed by memorial service.
Okay. You also, Miss Gwen accuses you of making statements about Miss Chitwood. Do you remember Miss Chitwood?
I do remember Miss Chitwood, the Chitwood family's personal friends. To my recollection, Ms. Gwen only came into our employment maybe a day or two before she claims the 29th. Well, she had just started our employment, to the best of my recollection, the day before the 26th, 27th, 28th, somewhere in that time frame. I had not even met Ms. Gwen at that point. She worked in our flower shop, which was at another location. I don't recall when I was introduced to her, but at no time would she have been in the embalming room, especially having been a new employee and also not even being a funeral home employee or an embalmer or an apprentice. I would not have allowed that.
No, let's be clear. Where did Miss Gwen work?
Miss Gwen worked at Custom Design Flowers and Gifts. That's our flower shop that we own. That's not in our location. It's a few blocks away from us.
So she's not on site at the funeral home?
No, she is not.
Okay. And then there's this incident that both Mr. Hesse and Mr. Canute refer to without naming the name of the decedent, fondling the vaginal area of the decedent. Did anything like that ever happen?
Absolutely not. These accusations are easy to make. I can make an accusation against Mr. Hesse. These are totally unfounded accusations. I never allowed anyone in the embalming room other than my wife, who was a registered apprentice. On occasion, Mr. Canute might have helped me dress someone that was oversized. But I work by myself. I generally work at night, and my wife is usually with me. On occasion, I will go in early in the morning and embalm, and you can ask some of our employees who have witnessed me in there at 6 or so in the morning doing my work. I generally do not do anything during the day because of the types of distractions that go on when you run a funeral home. You all are all aware of that.
And just briefly to explain some of the other documentation we've provided, there's basically an accusation that your wife cremated bodies without a licensed person with her. You've provided records that show what?
I think I documented this in my response. I was in the hospital at this time, was not at the funeral home for about 10, 11 days. There were several cremations that came in, to my understanding. I did talk to my wife a couple of times a day, and my understanding was that she was told by Mr. Hesse to go and cremate those bodies that evening, that he was going back to Kentucky. And so Doris did as she was told, but only after contacting a licensed funeral director to be there with her. And I have all the documentations where Patty Klaus was there. She has covered for me in the past when I've had to be absent. And you're welcome to question my wife. She can tell you the details, and we've got the documentation to back up that statement.
And that's Exhibit 2, and we have a record of Ms. Klaus performing those cremations that were in question or in question. Filed against you. All right.
And Ms. Klaus is aware of this, and she has offered to make a sworn statement to the effects of what her involvement was and what she did and what she saw. I will say this, that she described the condition of our crematory, which is not the way I keep things. She described it as a body farm. Mr. Hesse had received bodies that were wrapped in sheets or in body bags, had not placed them in a minimum alternative container, had shoved them over on the racks. And that's the condition. I found 2 bodies when I got back from the hospital, plus all the blood underneath them, and there was a picture of that in here. And if you want to talk about mishandling a corpse, I think that would certainly fall under that guideline.
Mr. North, you've also provided some documents. Is Mr. Hesse a licensed embalmer?
No, he is not.
Did you find records during your hospital stay of him embalming bodies with, and listing you as the embalmer?
You will notice on the documentation that I provided that the dates of these death certificates and the dates of death were when I was in the hospital. I was not able to embalm a body, but he yet put my name on the death certificate as the embalmer. And he also, in 2 or 3 of the cases, filled out an embalming report. And you can see he did not sign it or date it. But if you look at it, the handwriting matches Mr. Hesse's handwriting in the complaint and affidavit that he filled out.
And since this whole issue has arisen, we've done some checking into Mr. Hesse's background, is that right?
Yes, we have.
And we found that he's previously been disciplined by this board for being the manager of an establishment that filed a certificate of death which contained the forged signature of the medical examiner, is that right?
That's correct.
That was in, let's see, I think June of 2012. Your wife was present for the preparation of Ms. Chitwood, is that right?
That is correct. A gentleman that was in our employment previously goes to church with the Chitwood family, and he asked me, could he go to, I think it was North Carolina, to bring Ms. Chitwood back. And so he did take one of our vehicles and did go to bring her body back. He helped me place her on the table. I don't recall what time that was, but when Ms. Chitwood was embalmed, it was in the evening hours, as I normally do, and my wife was present during that embalming and actually fixed her hair and helped me dress her.
Mr. Canute also accuses you personally of fondling him several times. Is there any truth to that statement?
There's absolutely no truth to that statement. There was a time that I was living at the funeral home for a few weeks. I have an apartment there, and we also have living quarters in the upstairs. And Matthew was living in the upstairs living quarters. I did find, contrary to what he says, I did find him one night. He came into my apartment while I was sleeping. He was drunk, and I took him back upstairs and told him to lay down and stay up there. From that point on, I kept the door to my room locked and did not allow him in there.
We have other witnesses. I don't know if you will hear from them or if you. Right, his wife is prepared to talk. We've got other people who have been present when he's prepared bodies. His conduct with the bodies. I would ask to present them, but I'll leave it to direct me.
I have a couple follow-up questions from those statements. So Mr. Hesse, is he an investor or an employee?
Neither.
He was neither. So when he says that he went to the bank, negotiated with the lender, and paid what was asked of by the bank, did Mr. Hesse pay anything to the bank?
I believe he did, and that was all done without my knowledge or permission. He took it upon himself. That was at a point in time when he had some interest in buying the funeral home, and I had given the loan officer permission to talk to them about our financial statements that they had. And so Mr. Hesse took it upon himself. He also states in here that we were days away from foreclosure. That's totally false. You can call my lenders.
Do you know approximately how much he paid?
I want to say it was a 1 month's payment.
Would have been
Probably around $10,000.
okay. So you also mentioned that Mr. Hesse is under investigation. Is there any? Do you have any evidence of that investigation? Any type of statement from the police department, or?
No, we've had several interviews with them, but they want to get the forensic audit. Once they have that, then they'll go on with the investigation, but they won't have all the evidence that they need.
We do have Ms. Gray here, Diane Gray, one of the potential purchasers that he mentioned earlier. She's spoken with the investigators personally, I think as recently as yesterday.
One other quick question. So you mentioned that there was documentation in your exhibits that show that Mr. Hesse forged your signature while you were in the hospital. Can you tell us what pages of your exhibits?
Yes, sir. It would be on the death certificates toward the back where Mr. Hesse has filled out these death certificates and has listed Mr. North, typed his name in, a signature of embalmer.
It was on Mr.
Looks like all your death certificates have typed names, funeral directors and embalmers. There are no signatures, is that?
That is correct.
And those are the, we've provided those because those are the dates that he was in the hospital.
And we use director's assistant, and that's, it's are generated.
You have documentation of your hospital stay?
Yes, I do.
Here.
Here.
I don't have it here, but I can get you whatever you need.
And I do have incident reports from the Winchester Police Department where this has been turned in.
I think some of these items will be better discussed at a formal hearing, where everyone has a chance to prepare. That's my recommendation.
Can I ask a question of the state?
Yes.
Okay, so from the state, tell me why the public health is in immediate danger.
Today, we're holding this informal allegations of an inappropriate handling of a few. So these business dealings, these issues with the police department, I would assert, are not relevant to this conference. This conference is just about the alleged immoral. That's why I have Lori here, because she can attest to the side of the affidavits to see, did they seem truthful? Did they seem evasive? Were they disturbed by this? Were they amused by this? Did they seem like they were concocting these events, not just one, but three, that those disturbing events were what prompted the department to today. And these statements were made under, and that it's difficult to get current employees to provide negative statements against their employers. So while we will further investigate and try to flush out what others may know in the home, whose employment rely on the people at issue are reluctant to talk, but these people provided these statements under oath. We felt that was sufficient evidence to proceed.
Certainly the credibility of these individuals who have provided these statements under oath are important, and that's why we're bringing up, why would they have a motivation to statements? Obviously, all of what they're complaining about happened months before, so if they have the concern that they claim they have, certainly sat on it for months. And the credibility of Mr. Hesse, who's at the center of all this, this board has already found him to have disciplined him for submitting forged documents in the past, just 5 years ago. We would submit that all of that, again, we have other witnesses. I understand that the board's time is limited. We would ask for you to hear from them or some of them. If you're not inclined to do so, that is our request.
What would those witnesses be attesting to in general?
We've got Miss Doris North, his wife, who was present for the Chitwood preparation. She can tell you what she heard or didn't hear. And then we have other employees who have been with him to help him prepare or close, who will talk about his conduct in the embalming room and the preparation room. And we have Diane Gray, again, the investor who has been involved with the Winchester Police Department investigating these individuals.
If I may, usually witnesses like that would be put on at the formal hearing. We would have the opportunity to prepare and question them. The issue is just to
So maybe the investigator can maybe just briefly take us through the process of gathering the statements from the witnesses, from those that we have written affidavits from. Just kind of take us through your process of investigating it.
Initially, I received the investigative request identifying the witnesses to be. Based on that, I initially contacted Mr. Hesse and conducted an interview with him, obtained responses that you have, and also briefly discussed his affidavit and the content thereof. And it's the only thing that, as far as Mr. Hesse, one of his statements to me was that he had not witnessed alleged conduct in his 20-plus years of involvement in the funeral industry. I then contacted Mr. Canute and obtained his affidavit. His demeanor and his concern I felt were legitimate, and he expressed to me that he was concerned because this type of alleged conduct could possibly happen to a relative, grandmother, grandfather, something like that. Ms. Woodley provided her statement. She didn't have any direct knowledge of the alleged incidents. It would have been basically hearsay. And then Ms. Gwen was very direct in providing her affidavit with regard to the incident with Ms. Chitwood. Appeared to be credible individual at the time I took her statement also.
Thank you.
If I could, Ms. Weaver, how long have you been an investigator with the department?
Almost 18 years.
And what background would you have in investigation before you came to the department?
I was a detective with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department and investigated auto theft cases. And I was also a brigade AR-15-6 investigator, military, which basically conducted investigations regarding theft or loss of government equipment.
Do you feel that with your background and history that you have experience taking statements from individuals?
I do.
Do you think you have experience determining whether or not those individuals are telling the truth and lying?
Yes, I do.
And how is that?
Various their demeanor, their body language, eye movements, and that behavior, and their general conduct in the making of the statement are keys to determining their credibility and veracity as far as the statements that they're making.
How do you feel the statements that were given to you from these individual witnesses? Those were statements that were made that had a lack of truthfulness to them, or do you believe that they had veracity to the truthfulness, and if so, why is that?
In the case of each individual that I interviewed, Mr. Hesse, Mr. Canute, Ms. Woodley, and Ms. Gwen, I felt that their testimony was credible, that I did not detect deception or other behavior that lead me to believe that they weren't providing their statements voluntarily and that they had general concern with regard to the alleged conduct.
Other questions from the board?
Can I ask some questions of the investigator? Forgive me, what is your name?
Larry Wilson Weaver.
Okay, Ms. Wilson Weaver, did you know at the time of your investigation that this board had found Mr. Hesse to have provided a forged death certificate?
No, I did not.
Did you know at the time of your investigation that Mr. Hesse had submitted other death certificates representing Mr. North to have been the embalmer when in fact Mr. North was hospitalized at the time of the embalmings?
I did not.
Does that cause you any concern whatsoever?
Those issues, in light of the whole situation, issues that took place in the past, and I've known about them may have risen some concern at the time.
It would be concerning if Mr. Hesse has submitted false documentation to the state, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And did you ask Mr. Khalid? He makes this statement that he was fondled several times during his employment with by Mr. North. Did you ask him why he stuck around?
He was concerned about losing his job.
He was ultimately terminated, wasn't he?
I think so.
And so he would be okay with being fondled as long as he's employed.
That would be his choice.
Did you ask him if that was his choice?
Not.
Why not?
It wasn't relevant at the time.
Doesn't it strike you as odd that someone would continue to stay in someone's employment if that person kept sexually assaulting?
And I think it raises to the level of what their concern was about employment, that felt intimidated by the situation.
Did you ask him if that's why he endured sexual assaults to keep his job?
Not.
Mr. Knox, we may be getting beyond the scope of what we're doing today.
I understand, sir.
Okay. Do you have anything else or anything new to present to the board?
I have the witnesses if you're inclined to hear from them.
Unless the state has an opportunity to talk with the witnesses, I don't think it'd be appropriate to do that today. Is there anything new that you'd like to present to the board?
The only thing I'd like to, hold, just one second. The only thing I'd like to say is, this is an extreme measure to take this man's livelihood from him until the investigation is complete. We would ask that the defer that position determination. We're happy to have this full hearing as soon as anybody can get it on the calendar to concerns, and so we can get all of our witnesses heard, but we'd submit that there are extreme credibility problems with these individuals, not the least of which is that this very board has sanctioned Mr. Hesse for submitting forged documents. So we would submit that it's an extreme measure to suspend his license. We're happy to have the full hearing as soon as possible.
One last question. Have we had previous issues with Mr. North?
There's a complaint in 2016 against Watson North Funeral Home Cremation Center. It's a burial services complaint. Establishment's printing funeral funds report not completed correctly and discounts. 2016 complaint from a consumer that alleges the funeral establishment did not honor a pre-need policy. A 2011 complaint, among other things, is violations of statute and rule regarding the pre-need insurance contracts completed by an agent not registered as a pre-need sales agent, excess funds not refunded to the estate of the purchaser, insurance application not submitted within 15 days, and pre-need funeral funds not received by burial services. A 2011 complaint, discrepancies on the statement of funeral goods and services selected, casket price list and general price list. 2014 complaint that was anonymously filed that alleges that the property of the establishment has been sold to a church and the church is now operating on this property and that the funeral home is in violation of funeral laws. I'm not saying that all these were, I haven't researched the resolution of all these, I'm just telling you the complaint history.
Okay.
A 2017 complainant feels that due to the change of services, the funeral home establishment should have refunded part of the money that was paid for the services. Complainant alleges the funeral establishment hasn't been forthcoming with information concerning payment of the services. None of those are against Mr. North personally. Those are against companies that he owns and he's the manager of.
I just want to apologize to you. I in no way were trying to keep you all from speaking. And since you have spoken, in my opinion, it just accelerated in my mind the issues that this business has, management-wise, employee-wise, and operational-wise. And again, I make a motion to issue the suspension.
I will second that again. Fellow board members, I believe we have enough information in front of us. We're not saying that he's guilty or innocent at this point. That's to be decided at a formal hearing. But we have enough in front of us that we would be neglecting our duty if we didn't take action today. And as far as the allegations against Mr. Hesse, if there's complaints filed against him, we'll take action against him. If legal department sees fit to bring complaints against him. So I feel like we're doing the right thing. We're once again in a difficult position. And to the legal department, I would hope that you would have the formal hearing scheduled as soon as possible.
And tell me, give me a ballpark. Ballparks are kind of hard. They're difficult to determine. There are several factors involved with exactly when a hearing can happen. One, the board would have to be present and be able to attend. Generally, it's extra normal funeral board meetings. There has to be an administrative law judge assigned by the Administrative Procedures Division. We do not control their schedule. We make requests, but they generally tend to allow those requests to happen. Also, there would have to be the completion of any investigation that we may have. And then we would file those charges. We would have to serve the respondent. If the respondent wanted to, we may end up conducting discovery. Discovery may involve production of documents and also depositions of persons that would be involved. And that could take, if it gets to that matter, then the hearing could be, in my opinion, as early as 2 months out from now. It could be 6 to 7 months out from now. It just really depends on how fast the litigation would move forward, and the department would go as fast as we can, and we would work absolutely with the respondent and their attorney to be able to have a speedy, efficient trial date going forward. So we would be very willing to go as fast as we can. But there are other factors involved, just to let you all know, that we don't necessarily control, because this is kind of a two-way street here when we have hearings. I would also like to point out from the discussion earlier that the state has requested the summary suspension of this individual's license and not for the funeral establishment license. So I would ask that you all, when you make your motions, please have the motions made accordingly, because this is not a hearing against the firm, the establishment. It is against the individual funeral directors.
That's an important clarification.
Yes, thank you very much.
Do I need to restate the motion with that being included in it?
Yes, I would ask for that clarification.
I would like to make a motion for a summary suspension of the individual license.
It's funeral director and embalmer.
As funeral director and embalmer.
Yes, and I'll second.
We have a new motion from Mr. Wong and a second from Mr. McKinney. Any other discussion? Let's have a roll call vote, please.
Dennis Bridges,
Yes.
Mark Cochran,
Yes.
Robert Davis,
Yes.
Robert Helms,
Yes.
Clark McKinney,
Yes.
Charles Vaughn.
Yes.
Mr. President, all board members have agreed.
Showing one abstention.
I have Mr. Duffer down as recusing himself.
Exactly, thank you. Motion is carried. Thank you, Mr. Knox, thank you, Mr. North.
Mr. President, our department will prepare an order for your signature for that today.
Next item on the agenda will be the legal report. Ms. Renfro, Ms. Spicer.
First complaint on the legal report is complaint 2017-021371 against an establishment. This complaint was filed on April 4th, 2017 by a consumer who states his mother passed away and he wanted to get her cremated, yet the establishment had been slower than the family had hoped. So we filed the complaint against the establishment for poor performance. Specifically, the complaint there should have been no reason the establishment had to hold the body longer than it already had, and the family wanted the ashes. In its response, the establishment stated it was contacted on March 21st about the passing, where complainant advised his sisters were unwilling to conduct business until they could discuss it in person. The director made multiple attempts to contact the sisters to determine whether they could make arrangements and reached out to them on March 25th. The sisters arrived on March 28th, 1 week after the mother's passing. The funeral director explained the cremation procedure can take 4 to 7 days, and some is out of his control, like obtaining a signed death certificate. The family provided the information for the death certificate late into the evening on March 28th. The death certificate to the doctor to be signed on March 29th. The doctor's office called the funeral director to pick up the death certificate on March 31st, and the funeral director hand-delivered the documents to the health department on the same day and was advised he would not get the certificate and permit until the next business day. The death certificate was ready on April 3rd. Once the certificate and permit were ready, the funeral director called the crematory to schedule the cremation and was told the cremation could not be scheduled until the following day or day after due to prior commitments. The funeral director delivered the remains on April 3rd and called complainant, advising him of the status. The funeral director picked up the remains on April 5th and immediately called complainant but not get an answer and was at a family function when complainant returned his call hours later. The funeral director called complainant after his function, which was after 9 p.m., and delivered the cremains that same night to complainant at the complainant's request. The funeral director was therefore taken aback to learn a complaint was filed after letting the cremation commence without full payment prior to service, despite having explained the financial policy to the family in written form. The funeral director states that if the cremation was delayed to any degree, it was due to the family not meeting with the funeral director until 1 week after the first initial request for service. Included with the response were documents supporting the timeline of events as described by the funeral director in his response. Therefore, legal recommends closing this case.
Motion to approve council's recommendation. Second. Motion by Mr. McKinney, second Mr. Davis. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Next case, please.
Next complaint is number 2017024911 against an establishment. This complaint was filed by a consumer who alleges various issues such as lack of explanation for services provided, unprofessional conduct, demand for payment prior to the conclusion of the service, and lack of food as agreed upon, which made the family feel like the establishment took advantage of them since they were from out of town and did not know an alternate establishment. The complainant decided to have his son's remains cremated and made arrangements with the funeral director where they verbally discussed that 30 people were expected for the service and what packages was wanted. The complainant states he specifically requested to see his son one last time before he was cremated and to place personal items with them, and the funeral director told the family they could return any day on the day before the funeral to do that. The complainant states there was no discussion about when or how billing would take place. When the family arrived the day before the funeral director was not available, and the family was told it was not possible for the family to see the son one last time by a funeral home employee. That employee explained at least 3 times to the family that the son would need to be removed from the cooler and prepared for viewing until complainant asked her to leave the room and told her she was unprofessional and needed to call the funeral director to clarify the family desires, but she stormed off. Complainant was then intercepted by another employee who apologized for the employee's behavior and advised the family's wishes would be met. This employee advised the family that they needed to purchase a more expensive package to accommodate more food since the family could not estimate the number of people expected since they were from out of town. After viewing his son's remains for a final time, the complainant was presented with the funeral bill before the funeral service, which caught him unprepared, and he had to rely on his father-in-law for payment. The bill was presented without explanation or itemization. The establishment chaplain greeted the family at the day of the funeral service and made comments that made the family uncomfortable, such as referring to the funeral director as bipolar and referring to the establishment as the Insanity Funeral Home. At the conclusion of the funeral service, the chaplain went to the front of the room and spoke about cremation and how the establishment is the best place to have it conducted, to the absolute shock of the family, to insert an unwelcome plug for the establishment at their son's funeral service. The family believed there would be food provided based on their arrangement conference, but only coffee and water was provided. The family also paid $300 for discs, thinking it was the video of the service when really it was the photos the family provided to the establishment compiled in PowerPoint form. Further, the bill contained a $495 charge to transport the son from the hospital to the establishment, which the consumer considers to be a highly inflated expense. After the service, the consumer called the establishment several times and left voice messages, and after 24 hours of no response, sent an email outlining his issues and asked for an explanation and an apology. The consumer received a response in the form of a letter from the establishment's attorney explaining to the consumer that he and his family were wrong about their experience. The attorney's letter stated that the establishment upheld its contractual obligations, but the consumer disagrees and thinks that the conduct of the chaplain was especially egregious, as well as how the financial agreements were handled. The consumer hopes that Tennessee has a code of conduct for funeral establishments and directors to make the experience of a grieving family more pleasant. The recommendation of legal counsel is therefore a consent order for $500 and an authorization for a hearing for failure to clearly and fully disclose prices, unprofessional conduct, failure to treat the public in a respectful manner, and engaging in an act that's misleading.
Motion to accept the recommendation. Motion by Mr. Ron, second by Mr. Bridges. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next case.
Next case is number 2017026801 against an establishment. This complaint was filed by a consumer alleging conflict of interest, possible fraudulent activity, and incitement of family distress. After the complainant's wife died, he contacted the establishment and expressed his desire to pay the establishment directly instead of waiting for insurance, which he said he expressed when meeting at the establishment to make arrangements. Complainant went to the bank to withdraw funds, but because his name was not on his wife's bank account, the bank would not give him any information. The bank's assistant branch manager called the establishment to verify it had the deceased body and that she would allow the usage of a credit card attached to the account to be used for payment. The consumer was unsure what information the branch manager had disclosed about the bank account and available funds, and she did not disclose what she said to him, so he declined to use the credit card the bank was willing to approve. The complainant therefore agreed to use the establishment's insurance policy and pay their 20% convenience fee because he felt his hands were advertised, yet was told by the establishment that it could not get in touch with the insurance company. However, the insurance company stated that it had not received a request for payment or any information from the establishment regarding the deceased funeral services. By this time, the consumer resolved the banking issue and decided to pay the establishment directly for the funeral contract. But this request was not received well by the establishment, and the consumer was then told he did not have authorization to make funeral arrangements, and then his son would need to sign off on them because his son was listed on the bank account. And this conversation occurred one day before the funeral service was scheduled. The complainant's son, in the response, the establishment states that the complainant's son and not complainant was listed as the beneficiary on the bank account of the deceased and on her insurance policy, so the son's involvement in making the funeral arrangements was necessary. We were in no way involved in the bank's decision to verify the information that the complainant provided the bank and made no attempts to influence the bank's handling of the matter. The father and son made the agreements from the proceeds of the insurance policy, and the statement that we did not contact the insurance company is incorrect. Therefore, legal would recommend closing this case with a letter of warning against misrepresentation or fraud in the conduct of the business of a funeral establishment and misleading and/or deceptive acts.
Motion to accept.
Second.
I have a motion, Mr. Cochran, second Mr. Duffer. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next case, please.
Next case is number 201702991 against an establishment, 20170300011 against a funeral director, case 20170300031 against a second funeral director. On May 4th, 2017, an inspector for the board visited the establishment and issued a citation as the first funeral director listed license had expired on January 31st and was not renewed until March 6th. So from January 31st through March 6th, she worked without a valid license. And funeral director 2, the manager of record for the establishment, her license also expired on January 31st and was not renewed until March 6th. The establishment operated without a licensed funeral director as their manager and allowed respondent 1 and a licensed person to conduct the service of funeral directing. There were 7 total contracts written by the establishment during this time. In its response, it stated the funeral director 1 did not wait on families or participate in any funeral services during the date stated. This year, we did not get our renewal notices in the mail. No excuses and a lesson learned, but the online procedure is not the easiest reminder on renewal requests. I would appreciate that our reputation and dedication to the profession be considered in the determination of the complaint's disposition. Legal would recommend a civil penalty for $250 and an authorization for a hearing against the establishment and close each complaint against the funeral directors with a letter of warning.
Move to accept council's recommendation.
Second. Motion by Mr. McKinney and second by Mr. Long. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next case.
Next case is number 20170300901 against an establishment. Case 20170300921 against a second establishment. Case 20170300941 against a funeral director. On April 17th, 2017, an inspector for the board visited Establishment 1 and Establishment 2 and issued a citation because the funeral director's license had expired on January 31st and was not reinstated until March 1st, 2017. During this time, his license was expired. The funeral director completed the funeral arrangements for one person at Establishment 1 and one person at Establishment 2. During the time of this invalid license, the funeral director served in the position of manager for the establishment. In its response, he states, the reason my license was not renewed is because I never received a renewal notice by mail or email. I've always received a renewal notice at least 30 days prior to the renewal date. Part of the confusion may be related to the fact that my funeral director license and embalmer license are due in alternate years. Legal would therefore recommend a civil penalty of $250 and authorization for a hearing against Establishment 1, a civil penalty of $250 and authorization for a hearing against Establishment 2, and to close the complaint against the funeral director with a letter of warning.
Move to accept council's recommendation.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McKinney and second by Mr. Duffer. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, please.
Next is case 2017-032-551 against an establishment. A complaint was filed by a consumer who states a cremation certificate was filed for a decedent by a facility in mid-March. The family made 2 phone calls to the facility on May 5th and 16th. On the 5th, the family was told the reason the urn had not been sent was because of rain. There was no explanation why the urn was not sent in mid-March or April, and the owner promised to send the urn, so the family waited. On the 16th, the family spent several hours trying to contact the owner, who was available by 3:30 p.m., but at that time, the receptionist advised the owner was with another family. The complainant learned the urn was on site and asked if the family could expect a shipment. The owner promised to call on the 17th with a tracking number. As of May 23rd, the family had not received a parcel slip, call, or other notification. In its response, the establishment stated it did not refuse to mail the urn, that after the decedent passed away on March 8, 2017, the owner made many efforts to contact the family to make final arrangements, and after a few weeks, complainant and her brother met to make the arrangements. After the service, the family requested that the remains be mailed, but provided different accounts of where to send the remains. As one sibling would instruct the owner to send all the cremains to one location, then another sibling would say to divide the cremains and send them to each of the siblings. The cremains have been sent to complainant, and included with the response was the mail receipt indicating shipment on May 30th. The complainant's rebuttal to the response states that while her brother was sitting at the establishment office on March 20th, she was called, asked if she had any other siblings, and if she preferred if the remains were divided between her and her brother, which she advised she had one brother and it did not matter who received the remains. When she called the establishment in May, she was told the weather prevented the parcel from being sent. Her primary concern with the establishment is proper logistics and honest customer service all patrons deserve at a time of trial. Legal would therefore recommend a civil penalty of $250 and authorization for a hearing for failure to treat the public in a respectful manner and engaging in an act that's misleading, deceptive.
Second. Motion, Mr. Ron, second, Mr. Bridges. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, please.
Next case is 2017-025-171 against an establishment. This complaint was filed by a consumer whose husband's funeral service was conducted by the establishment. The deceased complainant's husband passed away on August 15, 2016. The deceased sister let complainant know the arrangements had been made. Complainant was presented her husband's veteran flag during the services and was provided with a note from the establishment certifying complainant, the wife of the deceased, was present at the service in case she needed a note for work. Upon receiving the death certificate, the complainant noticed her name was not listed as surviving spouse and notified the establishment, but was told that they couldn't do anything, that the next of kin who signed the death certificate would need to request the change. The establishment also notified her that she needed to send a notarized letter, certified copy of her marriage certificate, and an original copy of the death certificate she received to the establishment in order to make the amendment request. She received a letter requesting evidence from around the time of death showing she was still married, and if not available, a court order would be required because there was evidence he married the woman listed as a spouse on the death certificate after he married complainant. The complainant included the information she submitted, which claims that while she and the deceased were separated, they were still legally married at the time of death, yet as next of kin she was not notified by the establishment of his passing or that arrangements were made. The establishment failed to provide a response. Legal would therefore recommend a civil penalty of $500 and authorization for a hearing, as the funeral home has the primary responsibility for filing the death certificate and for amendments to the death certificate, while consumers can work with the Vital Records section of the Department of Health directly to file needed amendments to the death certificate, provided consumers have proof or documentation satisfactory to the Vital Records. Consumers may not know that that is an option and understandably look to the funeral establishments that serve them for assistance.
Second. Motion by Mr. Ron, second by Mr. Bridges. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, please.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'll complete the legal report with the remaining complaints. Number 12 is funeral complaint 2017-018-741. This is a consumer complaint alleging that the death certificate was not properly issued and received by the family. The death occurred in Georgia in February 2016, but the body was to be transported back to the state of Tennessee. The funeral home did provide a response stating that due to the fact the death occurred in Georgia, there was confusion between the agent that the funeral home had retained to embalm the body in the state of Georgia and this respondent. The death certificate has been requested from the state of Georgia, but as of this date has not been received, but the funeral home did provide in their response proof that the death certificate was requested in December 2016, which is several months after the date of death. Therefore, legal is recommending a formal hearing and to authorize settlement by consent order with a $250 civil penalty.
Death certificate was requested in December 2016 or 2017? 2016. Sorry, I see that now. Got it. Sorry, I was trying to get that straight in my mind. Okay.
Motion to accept council's recommendation. Second. Motion by Mr. McKinney, second by Mr. Wong. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, please.
Number 13 is funeral complaint 2017-018-621. This is pursuant to an inspection that occurred in March 2017, citing the following violations. Number 1, a statement of funeral goods and services failed to itemize the type of casket being provided on the statement for 4 decedents. Number 2, a statement of goods and services failed to list the reason for the embalming for 1 decedent. The third issue is the statements of goods and services failed to state that the crematory fee charged was higher than the price paid by the funeral home for providing the service. The fourth issue that was noted on the inspection was the general price list must clearly state which caskets are defined in the package price list, and the consumer must be shown the individual price list. In response, the funeral home acknowledges these issues and has made the necessary changes to the price list and discussed the issues with statements of goods and services with the funeral director to ensure these issues do not reoccur. Therefore, legal's recommendation is to authorize formal hearing and authorize settlement by consent order with a $500 civil penalty due to similar violations that occurred in 2009.
Hi, sir. On the history of this particular, are several, are they similar in nature, or do you have that information?
I do. The only one that is similar is the 2009 disposition, where if you see 2009-04-111, there was a $250 consent order, which is why I'm recommending a higher settlement offer in this particular instance. The other disciplinary history is not similar to this allegation.
Thank you. Move to accept recommendation.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Wong, second by Mr. Duffer. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, please.
Next are numbers 14 and 15. Funeral Board Complaints 2017-02-1641 and Funeral Board Complaint 2017-02-1661. Pursuant to an inspection in March 2017, the director was found to be operating on an expired license which was renewed on March 31st, 2017, days after the inspection. The date of the expiration of the license was January 31st, 2017. During the time the license was expired, it was found that the director executed 1 contract for goods and services. that was found during the inspection. In response, the funeral home states that the director did not perform any services and did not sell any products during the time his license was expired. The funeral home states that a pre-signed form was used with the signature of the funeral director with the expired license. The funeral home provided a written statement from a family member of the deceased stating that the arrangements and selections were not provided by the unlicensed funeral director whose license had expired. The funeral home acknowledges that the funeral director failed to renew his license timely. The recommendation of legal is to authorize formal hearing, authorize settlement by considerable with a $500 civil penalty to the funeral home and a $250 civil penalty to the director. This is a second violation for allowing funeral director to operate on an expired license. And that's pursuant, if you look at the disciplinary history, to the 2011 disciplinary history where there was another citation for an expired license.
Second. Motion by Mr. Bridges, second by Mr. McKinney. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Mr. Redfield. Thank you, Ms. Spicer.
That concludes the legal report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda will be the Director's Report, and Mr. Robert Grimble.
Thank you, Mr. President. Performance and compliance update. Well, before I do that, I want to make you aware of one thing, because this could be a point of contention later. So I want to read to you what information I was given. This is from the IT department here at the Department of Commerce and Insurance. It says the first 48 minutes of the board meeting today had no audio due to a data center problem with the microphone's server. The IT put in a ticket with digital media and they got the microphones restored. But I know a portion of that time was when y'all were reading the material, so there was silence, but there was some opening statements and things, but obviously there was a court reporter here. I assume that was at the respondent's behest. They did ask for the court reporter, but anyway, there was a court reporter present. But just so that you know what happened to the first 48 minutes of the audio. Okay, the first thing is the performance and compliance audit. Basically, the pertinent part of that is since the last board meeting on June the 13th, there's not been any official communication from the auditors of the Division of State Audit, which are conducting the performance and compliance audit. But the word on the street is that we should have some results in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So that's where we are on that. Legislative update, there were no proposed legislation ideas received by me from the board members subsequent to the board meeting on June the 13th and prior to the June 21, 2017 deadline as set by the board members at the last meeting. Thus, no proposed legislation will be submitted to the administration from the Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers for consideration of inclusion in the governor's legislative packet for the next legislative session. The exam administration contract. The pertinent part of that is a new 5-year examination contract has been signed by all parties. The exam contract is in the finalization stage. The department is in the process of obtaining approval from the Central Procurement Office and the Comptroller of the Treasury, and once those approvals have been granted, the contract will become effective. And the conference and the state did agree to the contract. It's just those finalization items that are required for it to be effective. Licensee report, you have a report there of license administratively approved by the Executive Director pursuant to the Board Authority for the period of June 13, 2017 through July 10, 2017. Closed establishment report, you have 3 establishments that were reported closing since the last board meeting: Huck's Lifford Funeral Home in Mountain City, Queen Anne Funeral Home in Pulaski, and Tennessean Funeral Home and Cremation Services here in Nashville. Disciplinary action report,
we're going to start reporting this a little bit different to you than what we have in the past. And because of the transition of centralized complaints, there's a new system set up to do the monthly reporting for the regulatory board's disciplinary action report. So that we don't, so that we make sure that the information we report to you is correct, we're going to report to you directly from that disciplinary action report, and we'll report to you up until the latest month it's available before the board meeting, which in this case, this is a report of consent orders that were administratively accepted and approved by the executive director pursuant to the board authority, and as reported on the May 2017 regulatory board disciplinary action report. So that's where those are. In the complaint report for today, we have 19 open complaints against either funeral directors and/or embalmers, 41 against establishments, for a total of 60 open complaints. I report, Mr. President.
Motion to accept the director's report.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McKinney, second by Mr. Davis. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item will be proposed rulemaking update. Ms. Hooper.
Yes, good afternoon, Board. I wanted to provide you all with an update on this. We have several sets of rules coming down the pipeline. As of now, the first draft has been completed, and we are reviewing those internally in the legal department. And once those are reviewed and we get a solid draft to present to you all, those will be presented to you all. We hope to be able to present some of those rules next month, but that just depends on how expedient we are in legal in getting the drafts reviewed, because they are complicated rules with this board. So if you all have any questions about that, we can discuss it now, or I can just update you all in August. Hopefully we'll be able to go over some of those rules at that time.
We'll actually get to see them in August, we think.
Hopefully, that's what we're hoping, but again, these aren't simple rules, so they may take longer to review.
Are or aren't?
Are not.
Oh.
Are not.
All right. Great. We look forward to that.
Any other questions with Ms. Hooper? Okay. Next item will be to adopt the board meeting dates for 2018. I assume they're going to be
Second Tuesday of each month. We're just asked by legal to adopt those so that they can request administrative law judges for those dates when they're needed.
We'll move.
Second. Motion by Mr. McKinney and second by Mr. Duffer. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item will be the approval of license applications. The first will be individuals.
Mr. President, the first one is Monica Dawn Atkins of Chattanooga, who is applying for funeral director and embalmer of reciprocity from North Carolina. Ms. Atkins is not present today. She said that she could not be here, but she would ask that you consider her application.
Application, is there anything that we need to take?
There's an answer to a question, yes, and she provided the narrative and the documents to support that narrative, and that's the only reason I could not administratively review and approve it. motion to approve the application.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ron, second by Mr. Cochran. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
For establishments, you have two establishments to appear before you today. First establishment, if you would, just come up to either side and have a seat, is Neighbors Life Celebration Services. Jacqueline Marie Anderson is the proposed manager at 520 West Lytle Road, Suite A, Murfreesboro. It's a new establishment owned by a corporation. The owner is Rutherford Family Funeral Services, Inc., 1332 Rosa Parks Boulevard, Nashville, 37208. Just state your name and briefly let the board know why you're here today.
My name's Chris Neighbors, and I'm with the owner, me and my wife, and we also own, just newly changed name, Neighbors Life Celebration Services here in Rosa Parks, and wanted to open an office in Murfreesboro. State your name.
I'm Jacqueline Anderson, and I'll be managing the office in Murfreesboro.
Is this a storefront like the one here in Nashville? Yes, office, yeah.
Gardner Memorial currently do your embalming for you?
That's what we do our embalming now, yes, sir.
With Mr. Gribble in your department, everything's in order to this application?
I'll make a motion that we accept or grant this application.
Second. We have a motion by Mr. McKinney and second by Mr. Rom. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Member. Thank you, Board.
Proposed establishment of Smith Family Funeral and Cremation Services, LLC. Proposed manager John Harvey Smith II, to be located at 3277 Franklin Road in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Ownership's a limited liability company, and the owner Smith Family Funeral and Cremation Services, LLC, 3277 Franklin Road in Murfreesboro.
Good afternoon, Board. I'm applying for a new establishment license. I've been a funeral director for a number of years, and I'm currently working at Murfreesboro Funeral Home as a contract employee at this point. But I was working for them for a little while. Me and my wife would really like to open up this establishment. We've put our heart and soul into this business and our own personal finances.
we've got a couple of daughters in college there at MTSU, and a cheerleader at Blackman Community High School, or Blackman School. And so I'm proposing to open this funeral home, or this funeral establishment rather, in the Blackman community, which is my community. It also happens to be kind of a quadrant of town where there are no services provided. So we feel like we'll make a significant impact in that side of town.
Will be the only licensed person there.
That is correct, yes, sir.
This is also a storefront type business.
Yes, sir. I will not conduct services there. I will conduct identification views there at that location. I have a facility for that with a body freezer, appropriate and a nice space for that. However, all services will be conducted off location, visitations, services of that nature. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Gilbo, is all of his paperwork as far as the office is concerned in order?
It is.
Okay.
Motion to approve the application.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Baum, second by Mr. McKinney. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Best of luck to you. Mr. Smith, thank you. I appreciate it. New business, live streaming of board meetings.
Very quickly,
How did that go today?
well, the live video worked because I sat here and looked at us to make sure. Of course, obviously, I didn't turn the sound up, but we were live streaming. We just weren't streaming the audio for 48 minutes. But just so the public knows how to get to it, the funeral board meeting can be streamed by going to funeral.tn.gov. Do not put the www in front of it. Just put in funeral.tn.gov. And then go down and click on public meeting information, and then go down to the watch of the board meeting that you want to watch. If it's the day of the board meeting, you can watch it live. It's live streaming. If you want to watch one that's already taken place, then you just click watch, and you see one that was recorded. Make the board members aware of that. Make the public aware of it.
New business? If not, I'll entertain a motion. So moved. Motion, Mr. McKinney, second, Mr. Davis, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion, we're adjourned.